This is Bop-it Smash, a reaction time game for kids that they play in the back seat to drive their parents insane while driving with its incessantly bad voice synthesis.
Missed.
It's actually kind of a fun game. The point here is to get your light to light up in the very center ball. I'm missing it by one. The small balls off to the side of the center one are worth 1 each. The big ball in the middle is worth 5. There you go, I just scored 5. And everything else is a fail. So if you hit any of the other lights, like that, or you just don't hit it at all, it will then die and you lose one of your 3 men. My problem with this game is not that it's not a good game. The problem is that my kids are better at it than me, and they've set the high score. I could just reset the high score, but that would just be cheating. But I could beat it. We're going to have to take it apart to beat that score, though, because I'm just not good enough at it. Let's see what we can find inside. The assembly to this game was clearly designed by somebody who hates humanity because it's incredibly hard to take apart. There's like 50 screws. You got to pop these collars off to get at the ends and pull the ends apart. Once you do that, it actually does come apart fairly easily, and we can get down to the circuit board itself. To get there, we need to pop these 2 halves apart, and that should reveal the circuit board inside. It's very simple, of course, with just the LEDs that back the light. What I want to do is to figure out how to short circuit it so that when the light lights up, it automatically triggers it, and I immediately score, and therefore win. So let's put the batteries back inside and see how this thing works. We'll take some measurements with a probe and find out what we can find out. The polarity is marked, but I don't really trust it, so I'm just going to check it and make sure, short it out. I'm just going to check it and make sure that everything is correct, so I know which one is plus and which one is minus. Down in the right-hand side, there are a number of wires that come out of the circuit board, and one of them is power feeding into it, and the other is power feeding back out when you press the switch. The basic operation of the game is that it checks to see when you push the button, and if you pushed it while the center light is lit, then you score. If you get it on one of the side lights, you also score. There you go.
You killed it! 5 points!
Did you hear that? I killed it.
10 points!
Wow.
And now with a single jumper wire, you can see that whenever the center light is triggered, it acts as though you've pushed the button. As we're going to find out, there's actually a bug in this game. They might call it a feature, but I find it to be a bug. I'll show you that bug in a minute when we get up to a higher level. But for now, the score to beat is 185. Let's see how we do. Whew, how do I do it?
45 bonus points! 65 points! Level 5!
Now, it takes several minutes for this to run through, which I'm sure you don't want to watch, so I'm going to fast forward a bit through it. We're currently on level 5. How do I do it? I've gotten so much better at this game today. Now what surprised me here is that, as you can see, the light is obviously going and it's lighting up, but it's not triggering the button. The best I can figure is that they have debounce logic in the code, or in the logic circuit anyway. What a debounce circuit does is checks to make sure that when you change the state of a button, that it only changes state one time. So it goes from off to on or on to off. Code will normally do this by keeping track of the current state and the last state and how long you've been in that state. And so if you're going from off to on will have to be down for a certain amount of time before it recognizes it as a full button press. That could be a bug because, as you can see, it's not fast enough to actually catch this. However, if you were to actually press the actual black button in the right housing, you will hold it longer, and therefore it will probably look to see when you initiated the click and if it was during the right light. But the light itself is not held down long enough or not triggered active long enough to trigger the game's logic. I had to trigger it manually a few times and lost my lives, and so here comes the end of my game.
Your score is 405. High score. Ladies and gents, that's how it's done.
Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to my shop. Let's take a quick dive into the concept of switch to bouncing so that we can understand why this hack fails to work at the very fastest levels. Debouncing an input switch is a technique used to eliminate what is known as switch bounce, which is the phenomenon where a switch's contact points, if you look really closely, upon being opened or closed, make and break contact multiple times before finally settling into a stable position. This can cause multiple switch closures to be registered when only one physical press of the switch has actually occurred. There are several strategies for debouncing an input switch, but one common method is to use a software timer. The basic idea is to wait a short period of time after the switch is detected, being pressed or released, before considering the switch to be in its new stable state. The problem with the hack approach I use is that it only simulates the button press for as long as that center LED is lit. The game's logic must use a timer that requires the button to be held down longer than the LED is actually lit. For example, to debounce a switch, you might first set a flag that indicates the switch has changed, and that's when you start a timer. When that flag is still true and the timer reaches your limit, you then register it as a button press. If you think this sounds a little esoteric and you could just look at the button state and respect it, consider the original TRS-80 Model 1 Level 1 computer. It suffered from this problem right from the factory, so if you tried to type on it, pressing a key on the keyboard often resulted in multiple copies of that letter due to this bounce phenomenon. Those computers soon shipped with a cassette tape program named Debounce, and the very first thing you do with one of those old machines is to load the Debounce patch. Unfortunately, since you had to type in the load command without the benefit of having the patch, it was actually fairly challenging to even load the patch. I could argue, however, that this game doesn't really need debounce logic at all because pressing the ends multiple times would have no effect on the gameplay anyway. The game only really needs to know when the very first contact occurred and which LED was lit at the time, and it shouldn't care how many times it's been pressed. My best guess is that they're being defensive against players who hold the ends in too long, such that when the next round starts, and then if you then release the contacts, it might register bounce on the way out and wrongly detect the press when you were simply releasing your original hold. Still, they only needed that on the release transition. Fundamentally then, let's say that the debounce logic requires the button to be held down for 50 milliseconds. If the LED is only on for 20 milliseconds, it's simply not long enough to bypass the debounce logic and therefore never registers as a button press at all. That means we can't get past about 400 points, and by that time, the LEDs are simply changing too fast to trigger the game. To make a better hack, then, what we would need to do is to somehow latch the circuit for a longer period, like a full second. Since I'm a programmer, I have no idea how to make such a circuit. Maybe a capacitor could be charged and then its current released more slowly when the light comes on even briefly. If you have an idea on how to build such a simple circuit, please describe it to me in the comments and I'll see if I can get the hack to work on the very fastest levels. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it in future episodes. If you have any interest in matters related to autism, Asperger's, or ASD, or know somebody affected by them, please check out my book on Amazon, Secrets of the Autistic Millionaire. It's got nothing to do with money and everything to do with living a successful life on the spectrum. It's everything I know now that I wish I'd known back then. As noted, I'm mostly in this for the subs and likes, so please be sure to leave me one of each before you go today. In the meantime and in between time, I hope to see you next time, right here in Dave's Garage.